So let's get started. Thank you everyone for being with us today. And we hope that you will um, share the good news with your friends. And also this session is being recorded. So those who come in late or can't get connected can always watch the recording. Also, I have arranged with superintendents for you to receive credit through a letter that I will send to them documenting your attendance. So you will get credit. I've had that question many times. And now I'm going to turn you over to Dr. Dumas, and it's your show. Thank you. We appreciate you being with us.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I've got some slides I'll share here. And then after we go through this, I'm happy to take any questions, and we can use the chat room or whatever you want to do with that. So I'm going to talk a little about football helmet testing and some of the new protective face shields we're looking at and options that you might have for some of your teams. We've got a great group of researchers, engineers, athletic trainers, team physicians, really wonderful group to work with that makes all this possible. We talk about automobile safety. Most of what we apply in our football helmet design comes from automobile safety. We look at head injuries and we look at injuries to all body parts. And what we always say is we don't know everything, but we know enough to make things safer. And I think that applies for helmets and concussions and brain injuries. We don't know everything. There's a lot we still need to learn, but we know enough to make some advances. And in general, we want to lower acceleration. We lower acceleration, and we're going to lower injury risk, and that applies to the brain. It applies to the entire body for any injury. I also always like to start these talks with a little bit about it's not only the helmet. You know, we talk about reducing concussion risk. We talk about three things. There's the rule changes, which are very important, proper technique, and then better equipment. So all three of these things work together. And we do research in all of them too. So we don't just look at helmets, we look at practices and techniques. We've done a lot of studies with Pop Warner going in to monitor practices and trying to get rid of some of these head-to-head events, replace some things with padding, get rid of a couple drills. And we quantified that in a study. This was youth, so we're 9 to 12-year-old players. We looked at 3 teams. One followed the new Pop Warner rules and 2 did not. And in the bottom left here is basically what that means. So we have 2 teams that stayed with their traditional way of playing, these are youth, had about 250 to 300 head impacts per player per season. If we took out a couple drills, we reduced that number in half to 150. And this was published in 2013. So 7 years ago, this was for the first time we started talking about that. Now almost everybody's modified their practices and their schedules not to have as much contact as we used to have. And so that's important. Not getting hit in the head is very important. Right now, we're part of a big NCAA study looking at concussions across college athletes. And we have this, we're a key part of this. We can see Virginia Tech here in the middle. We're one of the main parts along with the military academies where we instrument players in all different sports. We use advanced imaging, and then we advise the NCAA on best practices and best ways to make the game safer. We use a lot of instrumentation. We use the HIT system, 2 different types. One that has 6 accelerometers that sit in the helmet. And then we have another one that's got 12, which is a little more advanced. We started using these in 2003. Virginia Tech was the first school in the country to instrument their players. Now you have dozens of schools with different instrumentation and methods for evaluating this. We use the data for a lot of things. So we can go in each game and each player. We can look by position, fullbacks, defensive line, linebacker, receivers. We can see the types of hits they're receiving, how many they're sustaining, and the magnitudes. And then we can use that data to do a lot of things. Primarily, we know player exposure. And that helps us understand how to develop tests in the laboratory to better recreate what we see on the field. We can also use this to look at data trends. We can compare different schools. We can compare, basically, you can almost see different coaching techniques come out in what the numbers are. You can see it in practices. And so it's a good history of what the player exposure is. And we have this since 2003. We have it for adult, and we have it for high school, and we have it for youth football players. So we have a very good idea of what these numbers are. Julian Bales has a famous quote, helmets are not the answer. And of course, we agree with that. But the reality is, Lester Carlin called us in 2009, the same year as Dr. Bales' quote, and asked us, what helmet should we buy for the Virginia Tech team? And 11 years ago, there was zero data out there. If you wanted to buy a helmet, you had only to rely on what the different manufacturers were promoting. And of course, everyone says their helmet's the best. And so we, in response to the question, is why we even got into helmets in the first place. We were focused on brain injury. We were focused on auto safety, military. We worked with athletes to develop instrumentation, but we only got into the helmet business based on answering a question for our equipment guys. And once we started looking at it, and we realized that, there's a real need here. People need to know which helmets are better. They need to know which ones to buy. So we need to figure this out. And so we started testing, and a lot of things really jumped out at us. This is one of our original plots. The main thing that jumped out at us was how different the helmets were. So back in 2009, you could buy both of these helmets, the Adams helmet and the Rydell 360, which was at that point Rydell's latest and greatest. And if we look at the plot here on the right, okay, this is peak acceleration measured in G's. So that's one unit of gravity. If you do jumping jacks, for example, you might see 5 G's in your head. If you get in a pillow fight, you might see 10 G's. Heading a soccer ball, you might get 25, 30 G's. So you can start to appreciate what that means. For the exact same impact, the Adams helmet measured 190 G's of head acceleration. Just switching out the helmet to the Rydell 360 cut that down to 84 G's. Okay, that is tremendous in terms of the amount your brain is going to be strained based on that acceleration, because that's what we're talking about here. So the acceleration is you get hit in the head and your skull accelerates. Your brain's soft, and so it will start to stretch and deform and move. And if you stretch it too much, you start to have concussion, sort of that first layer of injury. If you stretch it more, you have TBI or brain bleeds or really severe injuries. So we want to lower that acceleration, so we lower how much the brain is stretched. And this was again the first time we were testing helmets, and we were like, it was just mind-boggling how different the helmets were. And so that's why we decided to come up with a rating system. And that was in 2009 we started. 2011 was our first publication. One of the keys here is that this is all public data. You can go to our website here, vt.edu/helmet. And you can look at any sport. Originally, we were just here at varsity football, but now we do all sorts of things. So if you want to buy your kid a bicycle helmet, or hockey, soccer, flag football has come about very, very recently. We also do youth football, and I'm going to talk about that. Flag football is an interesting sport because that's become a big growth in membership. And what you're seeing in that is just like regular football. There's headgear that you can buy. Some of it's good and some of it's not so good, and you don't know. And so we got into this. So if you're going to buy it, you can make an informed decision. The state of Texas actually made a very interesting policy that if you're going to play flag football in Texas, you have to wear Virginia Tech 5-star rated headgear. So that really changed the business model for companies wanting to get in this business and making them make a better product. It's a lot like the cars we drive. Nobody makes a 2-star car because nobody buy it. So that pushed all the safety features to make sure people are designing at the optimum level. Best seatbelts, best airbags, and we're doing the same thing in sports. So let's look at a little bit more at varsity football. 2011, this is a snapshot of our webpage. Back then, it's a little different now, but still pretty similar. We list the helmets by star rating. We tell you how much we paid for them. And at the first rating, there's only one 5-star. There were several that we said were not recommended. including that Adams helmet, because they perform so much worse than the better helmets. So fast forward now, 9 years later, every helmet manufacturer has modified their designs. And right now we have over 21 5-star rated helmets. And again, just like cars, once we put this metric out there, and I'm not going to get into the minutia of how we calculate it. We do a lot of tests, thousands and thousands of tests to get to these numbers. Once we put the metric out there, companies redesigned and made a lot better helmets. So they would be a 5-star level. And you can see we have all the manufacturers, Vicis, Schutt, Zenith, Rydell, everybody that's making helmets is making a 5-star helmet. Now what we've also added is weight. So not only has the cost gone crazy high, some of these it's, like the Rydell Precision Fit, these are custom made helmets for individuals. But the weight's gone up, so we're at 4.5, 4.8 pounds. So we put that on there too, because they're all 5-star helmets. So maybe you want to pick a little lighter helmet, or maybe you don't care. And I'm going to get back to weight in a second. So let's talk about youth football. Youth football is really where the bulk of the action is in terms of a marketing standpoint. 2 to 3 million kids playing football pales in comparison to 2,000 NFL players and 100,000 college players. So for the longest time, there had never been a youth standard or a way of measuring that. And certainly we would agree that a 9-year-old is playing football differently than a college kid or an NFL player. And so we introduced a new way of testing helmets designed just for youth players. And we published that. Actually, it was just published in June. So very recent paper. Everything we do, we publish in peer-reviewed journals, and we put the science out there. The other thing that's important is we're independent of any helmet manufacturer, so we don't have any financial conflict for any of these activities. So what we do is we put helmets, in this case, put a helmet on a dummy head form. We use NOCSAE head forms and a neck, and then we impact it, measure acceleration. And all we're trying to see is how well does that helmet pad the impact and reduce head acceleration. So for the youth, we came up with a whole new system because everything's been adult focused, for 50 years. But for youth, we had to come up with a smaller head. Kids have smaller necks and they have smaller chest. So the sliding masks that these are connected to need to be smaller. So we developed a system that has all these. We use a NOCSAE red head form, which is a small one that's rarely ever used, but it's a small, good shape. We use the Hybrid 3 fifth female. That's to represent a fifth female adult. So that's about the smallest neck we could use. They do make child pediatric necks, but they're more for below 6 years. And that's not really where we are. So we felt this was the more approximate for that 9 to 13-year-old. For our youth study, we do 24 tests per helmet. So we test 4 different directions shown here: front, side, back, and oblique. 3 energy levels. So this is also a very interesting development in the past couple years of research. Historically, we think about concussions, we think that big impact. But there's a growing source of evidence that maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a cumulative effect, or maybe it's several, or maybe it's a lot of medium hits. And so we want to make sure that helmets do well at everything. To do well at a high impact, you need a stiffer foam. And if that's your only test, then the medium and low impacts, you're going to be too stiff and you're going to get a high acceleration. So the trick from a manufacturer to get a 5-star, you got to be good at high, medium, and low level. You got to reduce all those down. And so it's not only that 100G that we want to take down to 50, but the 50Gs we want to take down to 25, and the 25 we want to take down to 10. And that's what the helmets have to do to get a 5-star. So they're helping you out on all the different impact levels and directions. So our youth rating, we did over 1,000 tests. We have a great team, a lot of work. We buy every helmet, we test 2 samples of each, and we put all the data together into the star rating so you can make a quicker decision. Right now, youth football helmets, there are 17 5-star helmets. So the companies knew we were doing this, so they didn't wait around like the first time. They immediately made sure that their helmets were going to do well. They designed them well. And these are 5-star ratings specifically for youth. So let's look at some of the data for these youth helmets. Again, to talk about, well, what does that mean? 5-star or 3-star. So on the left, we have linear acceleration. Okay, so that's what we were talking about before. That's moving in a line, one direction. A 3-star youth helmet for the front impact test, again, right hitting the front, might give you 130 Gs. Same impact for a 4-star reduces that to 99. Same impact for a 5-star reduces that to 62. So again, you get this cut in half acceleration going from a 3-star to a 5-star. That's a big difference. We're never going to say this is going to prevent every concussion or head injury, but we absolutely will say this reduces your risk and it reduces the loads on the brain. You'll hear a lot of talk about rotational acceleration, and I'm not going to get into that debate, but what I always say is every head impact has both linear and rotational acceleration. That's just physics. So we want to reduce both of them. So in all of our rating systems, we look at both. We include rotation, we include linear in all of our risk estimates. And if you look at the rotation, same sort of thing, going from a 3 to a 5-star, cut it in half. That's a huge difference. And it's a huge difference in how your brain's loaded. There's a lot going on in this slide, but what we have here is all the helmets, not all of them, a selection listed on the left. And the 5-star group are the ones where the bars don't come out to here. 4 stars come out to here. And then you have your 3-star down here. But what this shows you all those tests, all 24 tests, how much of it make up their rating. And what you see the blue color. Wow, the blue stands out. So those are the front tests. So what that tells us, if we look at the 0-1, which is by far the highest scoring, best scoring, each direction is about the same, very small. If you come down for the next few, the black or the side makes up a large portion. But it's really the front pad in most of these helmets that's driving the decisions. And that's because, by and large, they were made too stiff because they were focused just on that giant head impact. And that giant head impact you might have once a season, but you're going to have all those other ones hundreds a season. So we want everyone to come down. And like I said, the current research is leaning towards that it's really all of it. It's not just that one impact. It's really all of it that matters. So that's where a company could look at this and say, okay, well, I know exactly how to improve my helmet. And we give them all the data so they know that. And again, this is a selected, like I said, now 17, a lot of these are moving into the 5-star rating just by changing out their pads. So the weight of the youth helmets vary even more. So we got a 2.9 down here and a 4.5 pounds. And I can tell you one of the most common questions I get is these helmets are too heavy for the kids. And what are we doing? And what I tell coaches and parents is there's no data that I've seen or that I think exists that shows anything about helmet weight and head or neck injury. We don't see neck injuries in these kids. You don't see fatigue neck injuries. So I can't make a decision or a conclusion on what the mass means other than I don't see it causing a problem because I don't see those injuries. And we've tracked tons of youth players. We just don't see neck injuries. There's not a literature. There's no papers out there that show, okay, this is how many neck injuries and it's because of the weight because I just don't see those. So I tell parents, your kids probably like a lighter helmet, but I don't have any reason to say you should do that or you shouldn't do that. And I also don't have any reason to say there's any kind of a threshold. Well, stay below 3 pounds or stay below 4 pounds or stay below 5 pounds. I don't know if there's a difference in any of that. So there's rating systems out there. So we do the youth football. We do the varsity, which is high school and college. And if you make it to the NFL actually does their own rating system. It's very similar to what we do. We find basically the same thing. They do hit their helmets a little harder because they feel like the NFL environment is, faster, bigger, which is true. And we feel like, a lot of that doesn't happen in high school and college. Rarely you'll see some of that, but that's the big difference is the NFL is hitting their helmets even a little bit harder. And again, if you focus on that, you're going to be overly stiff for 99% of the helmet impacts you might see in youth and in high school and college. So what do we see on the field? I can tell you what we see in the lab, but do we see changes in the field data in terms of lower concussion rates? First study looked at this in 2006. They found a 31% reduction moving from the VSR4, which was the old helmet, to the Revolution. Now, this paper was widely criticized for lots of reasons, but the reality is they did a study, it was peer-reviewed, and they found a 31% reduction. And basically what they're saying is the VSR4, the older helmet, was smaller, had less padding than the new Revolution, and so the heads accelerated less. We came back in 2 years, in 9 years, looked at players at Virginia Tech. Now, not only did we have these two helmets, the Revolution and the VSR4, but we had both of them instrumented. And you could lay over the acceleration profiles, and these are hundreds of thousands of data points, and you could see the shift. Here's the VSR4 line, and then here's the Revolution. All the acceleration shifted down, and those were measurements on the field on players. And we only had one physician making all the diagnosis, so we had a perfect data set to look at. And what we found is an 85% reduction. You switch from the VSR4 to the Revolution, those players had 85% fewer concussions. And that's a big, big difference. We followed it up in 2014 with another study, but this year, for this paper, not only looking at just Virginia Tech, we looked at 8 different universities from around the country, almost 2,000 players for 5 years. And we found a very similar 54% reduction in concussion risk going from the VSR4 to the Revolution. And that's basically what we tell people. And that's what we sort of see in a broad stroke in those acceleration plots I showed you. You can reduce that acceleration by half. Now, again, that's going from the worst to the best. We're not talking about a little better 5-star versus a different 5-star. We're talking about going from the worst to the best. And at the time, almost half of football was in VSR4s. So there was a huge opportunity to move this in a better direction. There's other studies that report different things. This was a study done by Tim McGuire. I know this group very well. Mike McCrae, I work with all the time. And they found that the incident of concussion was similar regardless of helmet brand. All right. Now, those of you who are into football, you'll realize that, well, helmet brand, everything I just started talking about was all still Rydell, right? VSR4, Revolution, those are both Rydell. So if you said, does the helmet brand make any difference? It doesn't, because there's good and bad in all these different manufacturers. And in fact, that's what the study showed. So if you go in and actually look at the helmets that they used a whole mix of them, but they didn't use, in this study, there were very few low performing helmets. Like look at the VSR4, there's only 8, there's only 3 here. And that's because people had started to change because we had pushed this out there. So they were really only comparing good helmets. So that's kind of what we said is, right, you don't expect to see difference if you're only comparing really good helmets. Another study found the same thing. They said similar protection for different helmets, but again, they were only looking at good helmets. This was 2016. By then, football had changed. Almost everybody got rid of their helmets and had better, newer helmets. And whatever the manufacturer, Schutt, Rydell, Zenith. So we had gotten rid of all those 1- and 2-star helmets. And so everyone's playing with better helmets, so you don't see that difference. And that makes sense to me. I like to throw hockey in here just to show you some of the differences if any of you are hockey fans. These are 2-scale images of 5-star football helmets on the right and the best available hockey helmets on the left. And you can see the hockey helmets, there's almost no padding in them. And the injuries you see in hockey are worse. The concussion recovery is worse, takes longer, but they have been very slow to want to deal with better helmets. We came out with the hockey helmet ratings, and there were no 4 or no 5-star helmets. The best was a 3-star. And we talked to people around the country. Again, this is hockey specific, but if you measure the padding on a hockey player, the thinnest padding is on the head. There's more padding on the knuckles and the wrists and the hips, but the thinnest on the head. And so there's clearly room for improvement in that sport. And there's now a 5-star and there's a 4-star. So it's happening slowly, but it is happening. So I want to talk a little bit about face shields. And if you're really into football, you probably saw a lot of this over the summer. The NFL sort of made a big splash with their announcement. We work closely with them. We communicate a lot. They came up with a design that's sort of similar to what I'm going to show you, but Oakley was only going to provide the NFL. So we needed to figure out a way. In the beginning of the summer, it looked like the ACC and some of these leagues were going to mandate face shields, like a plastic film on football players. They backed off of that, but in the summer, we thought that they were going to be mandated. And nobody was really making or selling them. Shut was, and I'm going to talk to you about that in the end here as an option for you to get if you wanted to get that for your players right now. So there wasn't really anything out there. So we went down the path of designing one. And what we did is, you're familiar with these upper visors. We took an upper visor, kept the upper one in, got another one, flipped it, and dremeled off the bottom, and then used the same holes to attach it to the helmet. So you basically have a visor, upper visor, lower visor. So you have a full face shield. It was something we could do. So we made a bunch of these for the Virginia Tech team. But the immediate feedback was it's too hot. There's not enough air movement. We're just not going to be able to play in this. It fogs up, not enough ventilation. But we ended up making a lot of these. Some of them used it for a little while. We did some impact tests so we could verify that we're not doing any damage. The helmet still performs just as well, so we're not changing the risk. And we could also do particle testing, so we could come back and look at particle transmission. So if someone's going to sneeze on you or breathe on you versus you're sneezing or breathing out. And here you can sort of see it. If you sneeze or cough and there's a shield in front of your face, obviously it's going to catch it, right? It's not rocket science, but we have to prove that and show what the results are. But the problem was no one's going to use it. And that was a problem the NFL ran into with Oakley. No one's going to use them. The players just weren't going to use them. So separately, we both arrived at the same path, which is we've got to take some material out of the bottom. So we kept the same top visor here, but we made this, we call it our slim version. So basically, if you look at the football helmet, we cut out these parts here on the left and right. So players could get their fingers in there, get their mouthpiece in or out. There was more air coming through. They could breathe better. And this was much more popular. So we actually fabricated this for the whole team. And for a while in the summer and early season, about 2/3 of our team was wearing a version of this. We handed out ways you could make it. We were making these by hand. We mark them. There's different ways. We started with the Dremel. That's way too slow. Bandsaw is much better. Then we sand, and we arrange them, put them in with the clips, and you're good to go. You can see this is our starting quarterback. You can see this is, again, preseason, getting ready for the season. He's got the full face shield on and the lower shield. He was a big fan of this, and there were some video clips where several players were big fans of this. We did a lot of testing, and then the next thing was, well, because it was a little restrictive. What if we take away the top visor? Because we can do these separately. So a lot of players just had this sort of face guard on, not the top. So we did tests with both visors or the cutout visor. And in terms of outward projection, you putting particulates out, the bottom part alone did just fine. It stopped 99%. There was no difference. In terms of stuff coming into you, obviously the one below doesn't do quite as good. There's a reduction in both visors. But it's the simple thing. If no one's going to wear them, then something's better than nothing. So most of the kids were using the cutout visor. Again, we were making these by hand. The visors are expensive. They're 50, 60, 70 bucks a pop. So this becomes a very expensive / prohibitive issue. If you're saying, I got to get 2 of these for every one of my players, that's another 120 bucks per helmet. And then I got to find someone to make them, because these are handmade. So we worked with Shut because they were very excited, and they called me up. And so I sent them our design, and they're looking at maybe producing it. But it's a business issue in terms of it's still going to be expensive because these visors are really nice polycarbonate. And so, they're very clear. And so for the small on the front, there's concern that maybe there's not enough interest in it. And I will say from the league standpoint, nobody in the NFL is wearing anything. The players have pushed back, so they're not wearing that. And the NFL is not making them. I mentioned the ACC was thinking about making them in other leagues, and all that's really backed off. So the usage of these is not near where it was when we were in June, July, August. But if you want to buy something, there is something that's available. It's called the Shut Splash Shield. And it's shown here. It comes on with little Velcro clips. It's not as sturdy as the polycarbonate, but it will do the same thing. So we encourage people, if you want to get this, and these are two parts. So you can do just the bottom. You can do the top and the bottom. You're not going to get a lot of participation with the top and bottom. I can tell you that. But just doing the bottom is going to help. It's not going to be a absolute preventative, N95 type of mask or shield. This is what is something that's just going to help if you want to do it. And you can get these for not very much, and they're universally fit on there. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if we have questions, or if you have questions on any of that, the football helmet testing or the face shields, you can just let me know. I'll be happy to answer any of those. You could type in the chat room. I'm looking at that. Or if you want to ask a question, you can do that too.
I did give everybody permission to unmute their mic if they would like to ask any questions, or like you said, you can put your questions in the chat box.
One of the questions I got going back to the COVID stuff is, we're seeing a lot of colleges have different amounts of players. Certainly at Virginia Tech, we've had a lot of players that have been out. But the issue in our college is, and this will be different than high school or youth, but these players live together, right? And so that, because they're friends. And so you have groups of players. And the problem is, if one person gets it, he typically lives with his similar player positions. And so you tend to wipe out positions. And we saw that. We saw things that weren't a problem on the field or practicing or working out, because we've done all the distancing and all that stuff. But it's like everything you see, if you live with someone, if you're in a small room, that's where the transmissions happen. And so that's something that a lot of the colleges are struggling, because so many of the players not only live together, but they'll live in groups of apartments all together. And so you have to be careful off the field is really what we're worried about controlling now. It's a good question. So Todd Baker asked if we've been in any discussion with the basketball teams or other teams. We have had discussions with, and again, we work very closely with Mike Goforth and our athletic sports medicine group. We've talked about baseball, catcher's mask in baseball, where you already have a framework, so you could put something up that's doable. Basketball is tough. We have a great resource at Virginia Tech. Dr. Lindsay Marr is an outstanding world expert in this area of gators and projectile particulates and capture. And so there's good work there that shows that the gators do a good job. Masks do a good job, and you want to wear those when you can. But right now, all the focus was on the football team. And we were making these by hand, so we actually had a team of engineers, and it takes a while to make 75 of those by hand and get them looking nice and polished up. But I do expect, as we get into other sports, there will be more discussions about what we can wear. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, if not, I appreciate your time. And, my email and stuff was up there. If you ever have questions, you're always welcome to email me, and we're always happy to help wherever we can.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I hope everyone enjoyed this learning experience as much as I did. I'm sure you recall I've been bringing girls from Buchanan County every the campus, and they've really enjoyed visiting your lab. So we appreciate you for helping us when we come to campus, and for being with us today.
Absolutely. We're always happy to do that for anybody. We have a person dedicated to giving tours and demonstrations. So if you ever want to go to campus, of course, that's sort of, we're on the COVID restriction now, but when we get out of this, if you ever want to come in, we also do virtual tours. So we hook up cameras and we walk people around the lab. But we're very happy to show this to, especially, these K through 12 outreach type opportunities.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Everyone have a good night.